All right. Well, hello everybody. So our speaker today is Fred Clarke, and it was through the generosity of Ian Sanderson and Catherine Leonard who sponsored the speaker fee for this month. So thank you very much to Kate and Ian. So Fred Clarke has been growing orchids since 1977 and has been hybridizing for 40 of those years. With over 38 years as a professional grower and manager in the horticultural industry, Fred applies these skills at his orchid nursery, Sunset Valley Orchids, located in San Diego, California. He is a passionate orchid grower whose curiosity in orchids is broad and varied. Although developing Cattleya hybrids has been his sustaining interest, he is also actively creating new Cattetsidinae, Paphiopedilum, and Australian Dendrobium hybrids, amongst others. Splashed and spotted Cattleyas have been an important part of the Sunset Valley Orchids breeding program. His pioneering work in along these lines has led to the development of many notable hybrids. Most recently, the Grex Cattleya leolotoglossa and SLC Cosmic Future. Fred is an internationally acclaimed speaker and travels extensively within the US, Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, Australia, New Zealand, and South America. He is an accredited American Orchid Society judge in the Pacific South region. His plants have received hundreds of quality awards from the American Orchid Society. Here to talk to us about spotted and splashed Cattleyas, please assist me in welcoming Fred Clarke.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. Let's see here. Let's do this screen share. Got this queued up. Slideshow. Okay. There we go. All right. All right. Well, can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Well, let's get started then. So, I started growing orchids a long time ago. I was 18 years old when I got my first orchid plant. I'm 65 now, so I don't know. A couple of you might have me beat over there, but it's been a long and good run. When I started growing orchids, mini cats had just come on the scene and were taking the world by storm. And a gentleman named Frank Fordyce of Fordyce Orchids had a nursery down here in San Diego, and I met Frank, and he kind of took a liking to me, and he took me in and talked to me a bit about hybridizing, and then some other folks here in San Diego County did the same. And so I realized that in short order that I wanted to have orchid plants that were different from everyone else's. I didn't want to have the plants that other people had. I wanted to have unique plants. And so I thought I'd start making hybrids, and I did. And I soon realized that spotted and splashed hybrids were in short supply in the market, and in order to get them, you had to make them yourself. And so this talk kind of summarizes a bit of that. So how about this? Pink flowers with fuchsia spots. Beautiful. Or how about this? Red flowers with yellow flares and red splashes. Or yellow flowers with red spots. Pretty good. Or how about red flowers with red veining and flares? Or flowers with lots of different colors and flares on them. And how cute is that? Pretty good. And then most recently, cerulean flowers with blue spots. So the whole idea of spotted and flared breeding is really in its infancy, and we're just starting to get started in developing its potential. And so with spotted flower, splash flowers, there's really only 2 species that are important. Seems like there would be more, but there's only 2. One is Cattleyas intermedia variety Achiniae, and the other is Laelia brezeri. And we're going to talk about how Cattleyas intermedia breeds, how it's dominant for its lip color, form, and shape. And we're going to talk about some dominant recessive genes that you see with lavender and yellow flowers and how they play an important role in developing splashed and flared flowers. All right, so this is Cattleyas intermedia. And Cattleyas intermedia is a species from Brazil. It grows in a large range. It's quite adaptable. It's tolerant of all kinds of environmental conditions. Plants stand about a foot tall, but the flowers aren't particularly exciting, really. You know, the petals are narrow. The lateral sepals are kind of bow-legged. The lips are small on them. And this is the typical species. But the mutation, the intermedia Achiniae form, looks like this. This is a completely different looking flower. And the intermedia Achiniae form is where the lip color, shape, and markings are expressed on the petals. You can see the same color here. You can see the edge of the petals has this little fimbriate edge, just like the lip does. If you look right here at the column, the color starts to break up like you see here. And notice how wide the petals are. They're much wider than the normal form. And the lip wraps around the column with the side lobes. And so if you were to flatten those side lobes out, that explains the wider petals. So these characteristics are quite dominant. And we'll see this over and over and over again. And so this hybrid was made, actually it was made in Hawaii, intermedia Achiniae crossed with Laelia pumila, and it made Janet. And the Janets exhibit the characteristic, look at the lip markings, are quite accurately expressed onto the petals. The simplest hybrids, a primary cross between 2 species. And let's touch quickly here on this dominant yellow lavender effect. When you have a dominant spring lavender, genes for lavender like you have in Irene Finney, and you have dominant yellow genes like you have in Laelia brezeri, what color would you get when you cross these 2 plants together? A lavender with a yellow. So you're not quite sure, right? It seems okay. And what happens is the colors cancel and you get white or near white. Notice how the lip color is independent of the color of the petals and sepals. So the lip is a fusion of these 2, but the background color is whitish or light yellow. So you take a color canceled plant like Tokyo Magic and you cross it with interglossa. And you can see when you look at intermedia, the lip markings are expressed on the petals. So you know it's an intermedia Achiniae hybrid. You cross the 2 together and it cancels the pink out completely and you end up with a white flower with purple flares. Very predictable. So if you had a Cerulean intermedia Achiniae and you had a Cerulean mini purple, you could cross that together and make flared blue Cattleyas. And that same phenomenon is in play. Look at the lip markings, almost identical, and see the little cleft here on the lip shows up as a little pinch right here on the petals. Now there's a plant called Mari Song, and Mari Song has been around for quite a while. It's that spring lavender, Irene Finney, crossed with cherry chip. And we know by looking at this flower, you can see the intermedia Achiniae effect on the petals. The lip markings are expressed on the petals. So you know there's intermedia Achiniae in the background. And Mary Song has gone on to be an excellent breeder. You cross it with the color canceled Tokyo Magic, the pink, and the color canceled, knocks out the color, and you get white and the lip markings with the purple on the tip and the yellow throat, purple on the tip, yellow on the throat, show up on the flower with the yellow spot in the middle and the purple on the tip, all by design. This was a hybrid made by Roy Tokunaga. Spectacular. All right, so you take Mari Song and you cross it with Bright Angel. And so what happens is when you start to understand the breeding, it's the lip color that's expressed on the petals. So if you pick out a plant that has a dark red lip, like you have in Bright Angel, with a bright yellow throat, you cross it with the Intermedia Kinnii in the background of Mari Song, and you take that red lip with the yellow throat and you express it right on the petals. Red on the tip, yellow in the center. So this is the opposite of what you normally see in a Cattleya. Normally they're yellow with red flares. So now this is a red flower with yellow flares, all through understanding of how Intermedia Kinnii breeds. And then Just Because, we were just talking about this. And so you take Why Not, you cross it with Mari Song, and look what happens. So the interesting thing is, remember, it's the lip shape, color, and markings that are expressed on the petals, but also it's the orientation of the lip. The lip of Why Not is in a vertical plane with the petals and sepals. And when you look at Just Because, this is actually Just Because Leia here, you can see how flat the petals are. There is no recurving of the tip of the petals or falling forward of the flower, because the petal orientation follows the lip presentation as well. And so Just Because, this is Just Because Leia, but a bunch of these, we bought a bunch of seedlings, and then we had Just Because I Said So, Just Because I Wanted To, Just Because I Told You So, and so forth. There were quite a few awards given to this hybrid back in the day. All right, and then Miss Wonderful. So Mari Song is really proven to be an outstanding parent. So when you cross it with Laelia anceps, it makes a grex called Miss Wonderful. And remember how the intermedia works. It's the lip color, shape, and markings that are expressed on the petals. And so when you look at Laelia anceps, the dark purple, the yellow center, and the yellow calyces on top. And when you look at the petals, you can see how that's expressed, the white or the yellow with the white and the pink and the purple tips. Now, remember how we talked about how that's the shape of the lip is expressed on the petals. And if you look at Mari Song, it looks like little cuts have been made in the tips of the petals here. But what that really is it's recurved and rolled back, because the lip of Laelia anceps right at the tip curls back. And so that shape of the lip is expressed on the petals, resulting in this curled back, or in the single dimension, it looks like a cutaway in the petals there, but it actually curls back. And so understanding this fault that comes from the Intermedia Kinnii, I would, if any of you have a Laelia anceps with a perfectly flat lip that does not curl back, please let me know, because we can make this cross again with that plant, and then we'll have Miss Wonderfuls that have flat, rounded petal tips. The problem is I have never seen a Laelia anceps that does not curl back at the tip of the lip. But if you have one, you must step forward and let me know. All right, and so then continuing on the same line with a kind of a different tact in breeding. So there's a hybrid out there that's been around for a long time called Pennycarota Spots. And Pennycarota Spots obviously is an Intermedia Kinnii hybrid, because the lip markings are expressed on the petals. You cross that with Trick or Treat, and look how small and narrow the lip is on Trick or Treat. And sure enough, that little skinny lip results in Dennis Olivas, skinny lip, skinny little petals. And then, of course, the flaring mimics the lip, the wide red, yellow sides, and the red in the middle, just like that. Dennis Olivas. So Dennis Olivas was then crossed with Love Sound. And you can see it improved the overall shape. And the love sound allowed some little accent colors to show up in the flower. This is Laughing Boy. All right. So we've talked about Laelia brezeri a little bit and its color canceling phenomena, but Laelia brezeri also imparts flaring, and we saw that a little bit in the last slide. Laelia brezeri is a rock-growing Laelia. It's a rapiculus Laelia that grows in Brazil. They grow on exposed rock outcroppings and generally are considered hard to grow by most hobbyists. And the reason is they're hard to grow is it's difficult to duplicate the extreme conditions in which they grow under. It's hot and windy and rainy in the summer, and in the winter, it's cold and wet and damp. And that is just not kind of the way you think they should grow. And so rapiculus Laelias are a challenge, and brezeri is one of those. So in Japan, they crossed Laelia brezeri and an old-time yellow Cattleya called Bouton d'Or, or golden yellow flower, Bouton d'Or. And this was one of the first seedlings to bloom. And it was pretty nice. But then this one flowered, and it was better. And then this one flowered. This is Love Sound Dogashima. And Dogashima's got really wide petals. And notice the center line of the petals, how they lift up, just like the brezeri does. And if you look at Bouton d'Or, it has a nearly a horizontal petal stance. When I look at this flower, it looks more joyful to me. It looks happier. It looks more lighter. It looks like it's smiling. And when you look at Bouton d'Or, it has more of a New Jersey taxi driver kind of meh kind of look about it. So I appreciate this upward lift. I think that creates a very joyful and lighter looking flower. So this has Laelia brezeri in the background, but you don't see any flaring. And we're talking about flaring. So in the next generation, we take Love Sound, which is a Laelia brezeri hybrid, cross it with Circle of Life, and made Martha Clarke. And in Martha Clarke, you can see a little bit of color here on the first one to bloom. Then another plant flowered. It got the high lift and the wide shape, and you can see the darker flaring. And then more flaring appears in other individuals, but they don't have the fault of intermedia kinei. The petals aren't pinched, they don't fall forward, or the petal tips don't curl back because it's not the same phenomena in play. And then this one here, and then this one here. So here flares with no intermedia kinei in them at all. And the added bonus of these little extra accent colors in the dorsal and lateral sepals. And so remember Tokyo Magic and its color canceled effect? It's a Laelia brezeri hybrid, and you may have noticed that there's a little bit of yellow here on the lateral inferior edge of the lateral sepals. This is that flaring effect from the Laelia brezeri. You cross it with Circle of Life and makes Tokyo Life. And immediately you can see the flaring and the flat and good presentation of the flowers. And some of them were outstanding. As good as it gets. All right, so what about spots? So around here, my first spotted Cattleyas are starting to bloom. And there's several really important species in the background of spots, and they're listed here: Eclandii, Leopoldii, Schilleriana, and Lodogicii. And spots in the old days were pretty much white and pink spots, or maybe a little pink with spots, but now you can have, in addition to that, yellow and cerulean spotted flowers. And so Cattleya eclandii is a miniature growing bifoliate species. The flowers are quite large in relationship to the size of the plant. You can see my hand in the background here, about 4 inches across on this flower. Eclandii comes in a lot of different colors. This is kind of the normal color form, but you have eclandii where the spotting is so large that it touches and begins to coalesce, blotting out the background colors. There are pale color forms like this. There are cerulea color forms where the column, instead of being fuchsia colored, is cerulean and the lip is cerulean. And then there are alba forms, quite unusual. Next on the list of the spotted breeders is Cattleya leopoldii. This is one that has 52 flowers on a head. And if you look at the arrangement, you can see it spiraling across the front of the flower. But if you blink and look again, notice the arrangement coming the other direction, oops, across the flower. So it has this kind of like a pineapple look where it crisscrosses. Leopoldii comes in a lot of different color varieties, and there are alba forms, there are tetraploid forms like you see here. There's this one here, which is called Centro de Esmeralda with a white lip, green spotted. There are Leopoldii that have flowers with no spots at all, and some Leopoldii that look almost like they're peloric, but it's actually not peloricism because it's not the lip markings expressed on the petals, but it's some sort of mutation happening here. We've made some crosses with these to see what'll happen in the future. Then comes Leopoldii cerulea, the blue form, green petals and sepals with spots, and then the light blue lip. These color varieties that I'm showing you here of these bifoliate Cattleyas are extremely rare. And in many cases, only one or two of these unusual color forms were ever discovered. And so they're hard to get their hands on these plants. And when you do, it costs a lot. And then to get a good one in breeding, you have to buy a lot of plants and spend a lot of money to end up with a good one. And so they become very collectible and very rare and desirable for us orchid hobbyists. And then there's Cattleya schilleriana. And Cattleya schilleriana is one of my favorite, I think, of the bifoliate Cattleyas. And it has a beautiful flower, but it's the hardest dang thing to grow. Now, you guys in Hawaii have an advantage because you have beneficial year-round humidity, which seems to benefit schilleriana. The best schillerianas I've ever seen growing were in Hawaii and in San Jose, Costa Rica. Around here, they grow good for a while, and then you do something like repot, and then the plant takes 4 or 5 years to recover, and then right when it gets good again, you need to repot it, and then it takes 4 or 5 years to recover, and it goes up and down on this cycle. It's right now I'm in the up cycle, and my schillerianas are looking really good, but I got to repot next year, and I'm getting ready. I'm getting ready for the eventual decline. Even in Brazil, they'll tell you that this is a tough one to grow. They're not prolific rooters. So what happens is they only produce maybe 4 or 5 roots a year. And so if you do anything like sneeze on the plant, you lose a couple roots and you limit the plant's ability to perform for you. The neat thing about schilleriana is there's several different color forms. There is a semi-alba with green petals and sepals and a red lip. And there are cerulea schillerianas as well. So pretty cool. So you can kind of see where this is going. There's a lot of different color forms in these bifoliate Cattleyas. So what can you do with all this? So one of the early hybrids was Brabantii, and it was a cross of a Clandii and loaded GCI. And this is a hybrid actually originating from H&R Orchids. And so this is their Brabantii. I went ahead and remade the cross, and mine looked like this. It had a hot pink color and fuchsia spots and a little better color, but not as shapely as the ones produced from H&R. But this also has 7 flowers on a stem, which has extremely high flower count for Brabantii. And so then Brabantii was crossed with Pennycarota and made Lulu. And Lulu didn't express much flaring. In fact, the whole Grex of Lulu, there was only a couple plants that had flaring. This is a cultivar called Hot Pink, and it's a very bright pink with fuchsia spots. Lulu was then crossed with Caudebec and was actually made twice. It was made by H&R Orchids and a nursery in Australia who beat out H&R in naming it. They named it Caudebec Candy, and this is the best pink spotted Cattleya today. The flowers are big, they're flat. There's, in this picture there you can see 4 or 5 flowers, but the mature plants are producing 7 to 9 flowers on them, and they are just fantastic. Really good. The pinnacle of pink spotted breeding. And so then this hybrid was made in Florida. It was a Clandii by Laelia S. alkina. And Laelia S. alkina is a rapiculus Laelia. And a few of the offspring came out pure yellow with red spots. And this plant was cloned, and a tetraploid version appeared. And at H&R Nurseries in Hawaii, they crossed Jungle Elf and Precious Stones. And when you look at this, you go, well, why the heck would you take a beautiful yellow with red spots and cross it with a solid red mini cat? That doesn't appear to be logical. But a good hybridizer takes a look at the genetics and look at the parents in the background of these. A Clandii shows up twice. And Psyche is a Rapiculus Laelia cinnabarina crossed by Sophronitis coccinea. And so you don't see any spots here, but you know a Clandii is in the background. So they're recessive spots. You cross these two together, Jungle Elf by Precious Stones, and it made Jungle Gem. Jungle Gems were fantastic. The flower size is almost twice as big as Jungle Elf. Wider petals and clean burgundy spotting with nice red lips. I was fortunate enough to recognize the value of this hybrid and bought some seedlings from the nursery, and I flowered this plant. So I took this Jungle Gem and I crossed it with Mark Jones on the theory that Mark Jones, with its pale background color and clean burgundy spots, would accentuate one another, and made Catherine Clarkson. The Catherine Clarkson flowers are nearly twice as big as the Jungle Gem flowers, and it has the wide petals coming from the Mark Jones. And Catherine Clarkson has gone on to be a magnificent breeder of yellow and red spotted Cattleyas. Here's another seedling from that. And you can see the bud count here. So there's a flower here, 1, 2, 4 more flowers on a stem. They bloom twice a year, and the plants are 8 inches tall. So they're very diminutive growing plants with large flowers that bloom frequently. And so in a continuation in Hawaii, everyone got excited about Jungle Elf and its potential. So they crossed it with Waianae Leopard and made Sunko Sunspots. I believe Roy made this cross also. And this one was pretty good, but look how good this one came out. Fantastic. Look at the color of the lip and how it contrasts against the yellow and the spots. Beautiful. All right. So then everyone thought Jungle Elf was the key to success in breeding. And so in Hawaii, I don't know who made this crossed Jungle Elf with Tangerine Jewel and made Jungle Jewel, but they were all red with yellow lips. None of them came out spotted because Tangerine Jewel has no spotted ancestry in it. Well, a friend of mine in Las Vegas took Jungle Jewel and crossed it with Sandra Turner. So there's spots in the background of Jungle Jewel, crossed it with Sandra Turner, and this was the first to bloom. And he gave me the seed pod, and I raised several hundred plants, and they didn't grow very uniform, the plants. In fact, it was a very irregular growing cross. Usually when I see 100 plants growing, and that there are some big ones, some small ones, and some medium-sized plants, is not a good sign. And so this flower bloomed, and I was thinking, well, maybe I should discard this whole cross because it's behaving like I don't like. Well, then this one flowered. And I thought, well, maybe my procrastination paid off. And then this one flowered. And I'm thinking, well, that looks pretty darn good. Nice and flat, good red spots, big red chin, and a purple nose. You can't beat that. And then this one flowered, all out of the same seed pod. A red flower with a white lip. Oh, come on. Think back in your prodigious memory bank of all the Cattleya flowers you've ever seen. How many red flowers with white lips pop up? I know, none. And so, what's going on here? Well, why's the lip white? Remember we were talking about the dominant yellow and lavender effect? Well, this lip must be a dominant yellow lip, and this must be a dominant lavender lip. And the genes paired up and canceled and created a white lip. So I felt pretty good about that. And I happened to own this plant of Jungle Jewel, but I didn't own the Sandra Turner. So I crossed Jungle Jewel with some other similar kind of hybrids like Sandra Turner. And I did get occasionally white lips, which were quite unusual, but I never got the red flower color that you see here. And so I've abandoned that line of breeding because I made 4 or 5 crosses with no progress. Pretty crazy. All right. But remember all those Cerulean bifoliates? So about 15 or so years, I decided that I would start making all the old bifoliate hybrids in Cerulean. And so I put my collection of rare Cerulean cultivars to work, and we crossed loaded GCI Cerulean with Schilleriana Cerulean and made an old-time hybrid from the turn of the century, Pittii. Good flower count, marvelous color. You can see a few blue spots. The throat of loaded GCI shows up bright yellow, and you can see the blue on the lip from the Schilleriana. When you have a bright yellow throat against Cerulean, makes the blue look bluer. Some different cultivars like this one had a little better blue spotting, but not quite as dark a lip. So you know there's spots in the background of Pittii. At about the same time, I took loaded GCI Cerulean and crossed it with Amethystoglossa Cerulean, and that made Lodoglossa. Now, Lodoglossa has been around for a long time, and usually as a hybridizer, when you make a cross, you expect an improvement over the parents. Just generally, I mean, why would you make a cross if it was going to be worse? And so this Lodoglossa really is not any better than loaded GCI or Amethystoglossa. And to boot, there's just no blue spots showing up. But you got to know that there's blue spots in the background of Lodoglossa because of the Amethystoglossa. So you take Lodoglossa and you cross it with Leopoldii Cerulean and makes Leo Lodoglossa. And the Leo Lodoglossas were a huge breakthrough. The flower, this flower down here, from here to here, is 4 inches across. It has a perfectly arranged head. Look how the flowers come across diagonally this way, and they come across diagonally this way. It's perfectly wrapped around the whole. You could take a picture on any side of this and it looks the same. The judges, American Orchid Society judges, gave this a first-class certificate. So that kind of inspired me to do more blue spotted breeding. And so we took Leo Lodoglossa and we crossed it back to loaded GCI. Got bigger flowers, flatter, still got blue spots, the yellow throat and the blue lip. And here's another one. Fantastic color, magnificent shape and size on the flowers. Then we took Leo Lodoglossa and crossed it with Pittii. So Pittii has got Schilleriana in the background and a dose of loaded GCI. And look what happened to the flower, filling out the segments, still blue spots, but look what's happened to the lip here. the dark blue lip from the Schilleriana is starting to be quite prominent, making a very attractive cerulean flower. And then we crossed Leopoldii with Schilleriana and made Mariba Tiger, which are really good. They're right now, if you have these, you should be flowering these. The Mariba Tigers were quite good. Yeah, these are going to be the gateway to the next level of breeding. I just made a few crosses on the Mariba hybrid. I crossed Schilleriana cerulea back onto it, and I also crossed Leopoldii cerulea back onto it just yesterday. And then how about Gaudii? This is Lodogicii crossed with Leopoldii cerulea, and the Gaudii have been fantastic. Really nice. How about this one? And so then we started doing something else. Oops. We took Amethystoglossa and crossed it with Intermedia Akinii cerulea. And remember how the lip markings are expressed on the petals? Well, here you go. The lip markings are in the petals. And so this is a cerulea flower with blue flares. You don't see any spots, but Amethystoglossa is in the background of this. So you take Interglossa with its covered spots, you cross it with Leolodoglossa and makes Laura Newton, the first flared blue Cattleya with blue spots. Totally awesome, applying that Intermedia Akinii knowledge. Here's another one. And then how about this one? Maleficent. Just a fantastic, completely different color in Cattleyas, never before seen. All right, but wait, there's more. How could there be more? So what about spots and splashes in other colors? So we started breeding mini cats with flares to Catherine Clarkson, yellow and red spots. And this is what happened. We made Cosmic Future. So here is a yellow flower with red spotted petals and sepals with magnificent yellow petals with red flares. Fantastic. These are all from the same seed pod. How about this one? Oh yeah, orange with perfectly rounded, flat yellow with flares, Intermedia Akinii hybrid. How about this one? All from the same seed pod. Fantastic. Or this one. Or this one. Or this one. How unique is that? Even more unique? Have you ever seen a Cattleya that looks like that? The answer is no. Unbelievable. How about this one? Getting a little busy there, looking a lot like some confetti or something. Or how about this one? I bet orchid judges would like this. How rounded that is. Beautiful shape. How wide the segments are. Or what about this one? All from the same seed pod. Or how about this one here? We have red petals, yellow dorsal and lateral sepals with red spots and a red lip. Okay. This is fun stuff, you guys. This is why we make orchid hybrids. So you can flower stuff like this and see things that nobody in the history of the world has ever seen before. Pretty awesome. Okay. All right. So you've been wowed with the species. You've been wowed with the early hybrids. You've been wowed with the hybrids. How do you grow this stuff? So we're going to talk about watering, light, temperature, potting media, and repotting. And so before we go into that, we need to talk a little bit about Cattleyas. Cattleyas are epiphytes in nature. They live for the most part on the sides of trees, and some grow on the sides of rocks, and they're called lithophytes or rapiculus. Now, I've been doing a bunch of research on Cattleyas and the history of Cattleyas, and they've been around for around 15 million years. Cattleyas have been growing on the sides of trees for about 15 million years. So I was doing some research on how long Homo sapiens have been walking around this planet. And you know how long that is? 250,000 years. So your Cattleyas that you're growing have been living on this planet for a really long time. We've only been here 250,000 years. And you know how long writing has been around? About 5,000, 6,000 years, depends on who you talk to. 6,000 years. Orchids have been growing on the sides of trees for 15 million. So there's a lot to learn by that, and they've adapted to do this. So we do a lot of things to accommodate this. They live on the sides of trees. They've been living there a long time. The sides of trees are well drained. The plants evolved in a well-drained environment. The roots and leaves dry out fast because the roots and leaves are on the side of the same tree together. The roots and leaves get a lot of air on them. There are not a lot of nutrients on the side of a tree. They've evolved for millions of years in a low nutrient environment. In fact, you know how orchids in nature get nutrients? It's not because they get lucky and a bird flies by and some bird droppings fall on the roots. That's not how it works. It works through a phenomena called throughfall. And there's a study of it's a study of throughfall, of what happens to rainwater when it falls on the canopy of a tree, runs down through the tree, down the stems, down the trunk to the base of the tree. The tree collects dust, insect frass, and actually leachate from the tree, is rinsed from the tree, and it's washed down, and actually the tree fertilizes itself. It traps nutrients out of the environment, and the orchids grow and intercept this throughfall through the canopy of the tree. So they get a little bit of nutrients every time it rains. And so this is important to understand. Over fertilizing your orchids doesn't work. Putting a small amount of fertilizer in your plants all the time is better. And so irrigation frequency is really important. And there's a lot of factors that determine irrigation frequency, and they're factors that you yourself make. You decide the water holding capacity of your media. You decide what kind of media, how big it is, how it's put in the pot, the size of the container you use, the plant's moisture requirements, and the external environmental conditions in which you're growing on. These are all things that are determined by you, which determines irrigation frequency. And maybe your time availability plays a role into that as well. And so you can adjust any of these factors to adjust your irrigation frequency needs, remembering that Cattleya orchids want to have their roots get wet and dry out fast. That's how they evolved all those millions of years. When I irrigate, I want to irrigate heavily. I grow most of my orchids in pots. And when I want to water at a rate that's faster than what comes out the drainage holes. And in doing so, water fills up inside the pot. And when you fill up the pot a little bit with water, you're displacing air. And when you just stop watering and that water runs out the drainage hole, air has to be pulled into the pot to replace where the water once was. This oxygenates the root zone with fresh air, like what happens when an orchid plant's on the side of a tree in nature. Now, in Hawaii, you guys have pretty good water, but some people are on well water and they have hard water. If you have hard water, water that leaves deposits on the leaves, you want to practice leaching, and you want to water heavily like I just described. Wait about an hour and come back and water again. The first watering thoroughly wets the media, and the second watering and flushes it out. Usually, people who grow under a roof have more problem with this. If you grow in the rain, you get plenty of leaching factor from the rain. So Cattleyas prefer filtered direct light. Whenever I've seen plants growing in the wild, they're growing in dappled sunlight. You'll see plants growing sometimes in very deep shade, and you can see they don't flower well. You'll see other plants growing in nearly full sun, and even though they look like heck, you can see evidence of regular blooming. And so there are some seasonal light variances. Around where I live, we get about 10,000 foot candles in the summer and around 7,000 in winter. And I want to target 3,000 foot candles on my Cattleyas. That means I need 75% shade in the summer and 55% shade in the winter. And so my greenhouses are built with a permanent 55% shade factor in the roof to give me about 3,200 foot candles in the middle of winter. But in the summer, through that 55% shade, it gets too bright and too hot in the greenhouses. So I add 40% more shade over the top of the greenhouses, and usually in April, and I take that off in November. That way, year-round, I have very close to 3,000 foot candles. Now, getting older is the pits, as they say, and climbing on the roof of the greenhouse just a few years ago would be considered exhilarating. Now, it is considered terrifying. So the last thing I want to do is get on the roof of the greenhouse. And so I've been considering using 65% shade cloth year round. It'd be a little dark in the winter and a little bright in the summer, but I wouldn't be climbing on the greenhouse anymore. So that may be in my near future. So Cattleyas prefer temperatures like this, typically. Day temperatures between 75 and 85, night temperatures between 60 and 75. This is probably the ideal range for most Cattleyas. In the wintertime, temperatures between 65 and 80, and nights between 55 and 65. They will, of course, tolerate brief periods of higher and lower temperatures. Around here, we have a lot of nights in the 50s, and I have a lot of days in July, late August, and September of 100 degrees. So we can have a month of 100 degrees day after day here in San Diego, and the plants do fine as long as you're watering enough and you have enough shade on them. So I like to use a well-drained potting media because I grow epiphytic orchids. I use a mixture of 3 parts bark and 1 part perlite. A number of growers do well in sphagnum moss, but you need pure water for that, and you need to be able to control irrigation. So if you're growing in the rain, it might be tough to grow in sphagnum moss if you get rain day after day, especially with Cattleyas. You see folks growing in rocks or alliflor, but remember that orchids, Cattleya orchids, evolved in the presence of organic matter for millions of years. They evolved in nature. And so you won't be able to change how that root system prefers to be. They prefer to be in the presence of organic matter. That's how they evolved. And then hanging baskets and mounted and so forth all works. And so I like to use orchid bark. One reason, because orchid bark buffers pH. It's resistant to pH change. It improves cation exchange. It loosely holds fertilizer ions. It supports microbial activity. It's organic. It's cheap, and it doesn't decay readily. So I use a mixture of 3 parts bark and 1 part perlite for orchids that like perfect drainage, like a Cattleya. And this is how I use my mix. So for the smallest pot sizes, the 2 to 3 inch size, I use fine bark and fine perlite. As the pot size gets larger, I go to medium bark and large perlite, or medium perlite. And then the largest pots, I go to large bark and large perlite. And I change the coarseness of the media based on pot size, because regardless, I want to have the same airspace or the same percentage of airspace around the roots in the pot, regardless of pot size. This way, it makes watering easier. My 3-inch pots dry out at the same rate as my 4-inch pots, which dry out at the same rate of my 8-inch pots. So watering becomes quite easy. All right, so repotting. Repotting is one of the hardest things for people to learn how to do. And that's why you have repotting workshops and all kinds of stuff for people. But so orchids have evolved in nature for millions of years. Cattleyas have, and lots of orchids have. A plant, so humans, we've also evolved in nature, but we've become masters of our environment. That's why we're so good at living anywhere on the planet. But an orchid plant can only live on the side of the one mountain in the certain mountain range and won't thrive at sea level or at a higher elevation. It has to live in the environment it's adapted to. And so orchid plants get on quite well in nature. They're still surviving today, but they've got to deal with, if it's a wet year or a dry year, a cold year, a hot year, a windy year, if a limb grows and grows over the plant and shades out the plant, the Cattleyas got to deal with it. And if that limb breaks off the tree, the Cattleyas got to deal with the bright light now. And they're very good at this. They're very tough and robust. They're built to deal with that. But orchid plants never learned how to jump from tree to tree. They never learned how to move locations. They never learned how to move. They're stuck on the side of trees. So when you repot an orchid plant, it's really hard on it. And so you can say this, the environment that roots form in is the environment they want to stay in. It's a true statement. You've probably experienced this. You ever have an orchid plant with lots of aerial roots, beautiful white aerial roots, and you fold those roots down into a pot and put media around it only to discover that shortly thereafter those roots are dead? Or how about a plant transitioning to a mount? You slip the plant out of the pot and it has a beautiful white root system, and you tie it onto a mount, and shortly thereafter those roots that were once good in the pot are now dead. This is because the environment roots form in is the environment they want to stay in. So there's only one time to repot, is when new roots are starting to grow, because the new roots are going to grow into the new environment and be happy. And the old roots are going to suffer a rapid root zone environment change, which leads to root decline. Now, how many of you have taken a little orchid plant and put it in a big pot, feeling confident that you will not need to repot soon? And it was true, right? You took that little plant, put it in a big pot, and you didn't have to repot ever again. And why doesn't that work? Why can't you take a little plant and put it in a big pot? That's because you're growing epiphytic orchids. If you take a little plant and put it in a big pot, it stays too wet too long, and that little plant can't grow well. So you want to have a small pot so you get 3 years worth of growth maximum in it, and then the repotting process. And so here's a plant with a new growth coming over the side of the pot. I'd like to repot now, but I don't know when this plant roots. So you have to wait. So I'm waiting. Then the new green root tips start, and this is the time you repot. You slip, and then what happens if you don't repot on time? You get roots that look like this. And have you ever over lovingly touched a green root tip? And what happens? It breaks right off. And does that root continue to elongate? No, it doesn't. So you slip the plant out of the pot, and now you have to be really careful. But look at all the green root tips growing inside this container. There's 35 or 40 green root tips all through here. Sometimes you hear people say, remove all of the old potting media. but I don't remove all of it because I don't want to break these green root tips. So what I do is from the point farthest away from this tightly knitted web of roots, I reach in where the oldest roots are and start pulling out the media and any old roots that are in the way. If you're going to damage roots, the ones to damage are the old roots, because the new roots are going to do all the work in the future. The roots with green root tips are going to take over for the old roots. I then select a pot for no more than 3 years worth of growth, and I position the back of the plant against the rim of the pot to create that space for 3 years worth of growth with the smallest pot size. Then you have to add potting media. And when you add the potting media, you have to push it down past those green root tips. If you were to use a potting stick, would you abrade, crush those green root tips unknowingly? So what I do is I throw a handful of media in the pot, I grab the rim of the pot and shake it vigorously, and the bark particles fall in and around the plant. I reach in with my index fingers and pack down, and then I repeat and repeat until you get near the top. I then switch to my thumbs to press down the media on the sides, and then directly in front, I never press down firmly, because if you did, you would be driving the bark into those green root tips and damaging them. So I loose fill in the front. And then I write a new tag. And I always write a new tags. Tags get old, they get brittle, they fade, they break. And I put the date on the tag. But the date on the tag is not when I repotted. In this case, the date has been post-dated about 4 weeks, because what I want to know is when my plant roots. Knowing when your plants root allow you to repot just before new roots start. And if you repotted then, you would have very little setback or loss of your plants in the process. So what I do is I walk around my greenhouse and I have a pencil or a Sharpie pen with me. And whenever I see one of my plants producing new roots, I write the date down on it. I might not be repotting soon, but I'll be repotting in the future. So knowing and writing down on the tag when the plant roots makes you a much better grower in assuring that your plants don't suffer transplant shock and the setback. And so special thanks to all of you guys who are going to be growing fantastic spotted and splash Cattleyas. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Fred. That was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Especially that SLC future, Cosmic Future.
Cosmic Future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, all the combinations. That would be a lot of fun to get a bunch of seedlings and see how that turns out.
Yeah. So you know, when you make hybrids for the first time and you're testing, you know, a new direction in breeding, you're not really, you know, you don't know, it's a test, and then you flower them and you go, wow, that's fantastic, I'll hurry up and make more of those. Well, hurrying up with orchid breeding is 5 years later, you'll have them again, right? And so we're 2 years out right now from having more of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Good to know. All right. So we open up for maybe some questions a little bit. Anybody have any questions?
Fred, have you made any of the old primary hybrids like Batemaniana and Doris using tetraploid parents?
Not so much. I just made Pacavia with 4N parents. That's on the website right now. But what I have been doing is I've been going back and colchicine treating a lot of species lately. And next year, a lot of that stuff will be available. We're going to have a lot of Dowianas and Dowiana rositas that have been colchicine treated. The problem of making primaries with it in the 4N form is you got to have 4N parents to start with. So you have to start somewhere. And so some of those really important hybrids, it's tough to find a Cattleya Worzowicii tetraploid out there. You know, people might tell you they have one, but you know, you don't know it is until you work with it for a while and see how it breeds. But we're working on those. We have treated plants that we're raising and looking for the polyploid mutations that come out of there. So, but I have like King George next year. King George's triumphant's back to Dowiana, treated with colchicine. So, you know, yellow flowers with red lips, pretty cool. And the old standards type of look.
Fred, hi, this is Brandon. Hi, do you have any splash or spotted Cattleyas in flask form?
Not right now.
No.
I'm gonna have a new flask list in about 3 weeks. We're and I think there's some spotted and splash stuff in there. Maybe there'll be some splashed or spotted. I
Yeah.
don't know if there will be combined splash and spotted.
Okay. Are you gonna let HOS know about that too, or?
Well, just keep an eye on the website. Yeah, it might
Okay.
time with the catasetum release, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that'd be a good time to put that in there. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Thanks.
Hey, Fred, good evening. It's Horahame here. Thanks so much for a great talk. Thanks for
Yeah.
staying up late for us.
Oh, come on, ask me anything.
Fred, I have a question. So in general, how long time going to take from cross-pollination to the award-winning plant?
Yeah, so the seed pod takes 6 months approximately. The lab takes 1 year. The plug tray takes 1 year. You grow it in a 3-inch pot for 2 years. So usually within 5 years, you would have a plant. You might see flowers in year 3, but give it a couple more years to size up and be a little more impressive, you know, and be at its full potential. So usually 5 to 6 years after pollination.
And from one seed pod, so in usually how many plant you put there? Then like
Yeah, so one seed pod has hundreds of thousands of seeds in it. And so so if you wanted hundreds of thousands of plants, you could have that out of a seed pod. Typically, I grow 200 to 300 plants
okay.
of a cross, generally. Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, more than that, you know, if you had 1,000, you know, you might have trouble selling them. And then you have to make, since I'm a breeder, a hybridizer, you know, I probably make 400 hybrids a year. And so if I made 400 hybrids a year times 1,000, that's a lot of plants. I'll never sell all those. So if I make 400 times 200, then I can sell those. Yeah. So you do have to, you know, I'm a hobbyist too, right? And how many of you have extra space in your growing area? Okay. So you know how it is. I got the same problem. Man, if I had more space, I'd do more, but I gotta control myself.
Thank you.
Fred,
Fred,
how many workers in your nursery?
Well, I have myself, and I probably work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. I have Carlos. He works he works 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. And then I have some season during we ship a lot of plants. And so on Saturday and Sunday, I have a couple guys come in and they work. So I probably have the equivalent of maybe, besides myself, 2 full-time workers. It's about 1.5 acres. the greenhouse space. I'm putting up another greenhouse. It's I've said this 4 other times. It's my last greenhouse I'm building. But you know, the first rule of greenhouses is build it as big as you can afford, and the second rule is leave room for expansion. And so I'm building a new greenhouse is 45 feet wide and 140 feet long. So it's going to be a no heat greenhouse. So here in California, we do get some night temperatures that are close to freezing in January typically, but this is going to be a no heat greenhouse. And we're going to have cold tolerant orchids in there like cymbidiums and Australian dendrobiums and sarcochilas and some things like that are going to be in that greenhouse. Yeah.
So, Holly Sullivan, when you talked about how you kind of looked at the parents and all of the information to make the different hybrids, do you keep track of that somehow? And do you do it on a computer? Because that's a lot.
Yeah, so it's when I first started, I used to I still have a logbook now, but it's not as detailed. So before, I would list the 2 parents of the hybrid, I would assign a cross number, and then I would write down a couple sentences of what I thought the offspring would look like at the time I made the cross. So you could go back and you could see if you're thinking about what the parents would do was accurate. And so I probably did that for, I don't know, quite a while, 20 years maybe. But then I stopped doing that because, you know, it's if you had 50 children, right? They were your children and you were getting on the bus to go somewhere, right? You would know when one of them was missing, even though you didn't count them all off one by one. And so it's kind of like that with my breeding, you know, I'm so familiar with everyone that and I am so aware of the ancestry in the breeding that I can predict with, I'd say, high accuracy of what the offspring are going to look like. Every once in a while, you get a surprise here and there, but it's usually pretty good. And you guys have looked at the website, and I have those descriptions that I write about what I think you know, and you know, if you can refer back to that information is archived for you on the archive section. So if you get across and, you know, it's 5 years later, you can go back and look it up and see. It's like a stack of old catalogs, and you can go back and look and see and you can check me and how close I was in my prediction on that. And occasionally I'll go back when I have some hybrids and read what I wrote and see if how accurate I was. And so but it's like anything, right? You do it long enough, you start to get that sixth sense about things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, hi, Fred. This is Kate. I'm actually logged in as Ian. I couldn't find my login. Did you sell out of your Cattleyas flasks already? How fast do those go?
They usually go pretty quick. Usually they're available in April, late March, April, sometimes in May. I had a pretty big list on there for a while. But then, you know, people see the list and the guys from Australia call me up and they say, send me all your flask, you know, that you have. And so we send them out. And so we're out pretty much for this year. We'll have more next April. The new Cattleyas list will be out. It's coming quick here. Is really impressive. It's you know, I say that every year, but man, it's really good. Mike, you know, you guys are going to be loving it. If you've been tracking Cattleyas breeding for a while, there are some hybrids on there that are very, very collectible. There's some species on there that have never been offered before in the United States, like Cattleyas evani. That is a must-have. There are Cattleyas denticulatum on there. There's Cattleyas tigrinum, including some unusual Cycnochi species that you just can't get.
And that's coming out, that list is coming out soon?
In early July, probably the July 3rd or something like that, right around the 4th of July. We're having unseasonably cloudy weather here in Southern California. It's even made the news. We have had we had a very cold, wet winter. You heard all about the rain. We had, wow, 25 inches. That sounds like that's a lot for us, but I know you guys get how many feet over there of rain. So we had 2 feet, which is a lot, but it was really cloudy during that time. And then we've hardly seen the sun since March. From March 1st to May 22nd, there was 13 cloudless days. That was all. And so that slows your plants down when it's so cloudy. So normally I release the list in June sometime, right about now, but the plants are just falling behind. So it'll be about July 4th.
Fred, can you say something about how you pick seed parent versus pollen parent?
Well, usually what happens is I'd like the pod parent to be the strongest, most robust grower, typically. And that's because I believe that there are some maternal elements that are transferred to the offspring. And so if you have a strong growing pod parent, usually you get pretty good growing offspring. Sometimes that's not possible depending on the circumstances, and sometimes I'll make reciprocal hybrids where we'll make the same cross with pod parent, and then we raise a population, we watch how they grow. Sometimes you see some differences, and a lot of times it's negligible, the difference. There's nothing clear cut on that. Yeah, so strong growing plants, pod parent. Or if you had a plant stature situation, like you were trying to create shorter growing hybrids, you would use the shorter plant as the pod plant.
Fred, when Ina is here, when you are taking the seeds out from the seed pod, which part of the area did you choose? The center part, or the one by the pedicel, or the one at the tip?
Usually I scrape as much of the seed as I can get out of the pod. It's interesting how orchid embryos are pollinated. There's actually a pollen tube that attaches to each embryo inside that seed capsule. And if there is 500,000 seeds in there, that means there's 500,000 pollen tubes. And so the pollen has to grow down the length of the pollen tube in order to fertilize the embryo. And so the first seeds closest to the tip of the pod are the first embryos fertilized, because it's the shortest distance down the pollen tube. And so, and often the farthest point from the tip of the pod is where the least fertilization occurs. So I would say that you want to try to get the front of the pod more importantly than the back of the pod into the flask when you're sowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like papaya, the center part of the fruit is actually producing hermaphrodite mostly, and the further away is mainly the one that we do not want to have.
Yeah,
they are having all the male flowers. Yeah.
Right.
I have another question. I see some of the painting behind you. Did you do all those?
Oh, no, those are gifts and stuff that people have given me. Yeah. And there was a guy in Brazil who was painting catasetum. So this one back here.
That's pretty.
Isn't that pretty? And then
Very
you
pretty.
can't, my head's in the way. This is one here too that's quite nice.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then some other stuff. So yeah, just little things you collect over the years that your customers give you. Yeah.
All right.
Fred, last question for the evening, and then I'll leave you alone. You had mentioned that, you do it long enough and you kind of develop a sixth sense about what you're going to get. And I thought it would be interesting to ask, after nearly 40 years of hybridizing, what do you think is the biggest surprise that's come out of anything you've made?
Well, that's a pretty good question. That happened, this was a long time ago, but when we made After Dark, we weren't expecting black flowers, really. We crossed a dark brown flower with a dark red flower, and you got black, right? And then even what's even more mind-boggling is, so Cattleyas flowers last 7 days. Mormodi's flowers last 2-3 weeks. Clarke flowers last about 3 weeks. So when you cross a 1 week flower with a 3 week flower with the 3 week lasting flower, how long should the flower life be? Right? Maybe 3 weeks if you got lucky, 2 weeks. How long do Fred Clarke R After Dark flowers last? 6 weeks. That was a shock. That's probably I think that's the biggest shock I've ever seen. How could flower life be cumulative based on the parents? That would be like taking a 5-flowered Cattleya and crossing it with a 5-flowered Cattleya and getting 10 flowers on the stem. You would not expect that. So how would flower life be so long in a hybrid like that? And it happens in other ways too. So I have a new group of hybrids with called Cattleyas, Cattleyas crossed with Mormodi's. You take a Cattleyas last 7 days, cross with a more last 2 weeks. And how long did Cattleyas last? 4 to 6 weeks. Cumulative. Like, what the heck is going on here? Very unusual phenomena with Cattleyas to do that. Unexplained. Nobody can explain why it would be cumulative versus added. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but of all the developments that come out of seed pod, that's kind of a nice one.
Yeah, you're happy about that. That's why Fred Clarke R's have done very well in front of the judges, because they stay in flower so long, you can get it to 2 judgings in the, right? It lasts long enough to go to 2 judgings with the plant. So plenty of opportunities to get them in front of the judges. In a Cattleyas, you almost never get them judged because it has to bloom the 2 days or 1 day before judging, in order to get the judge's attention with one. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating that it would be cumulative flower life. Amazing. But that's the fun of breeding, right? Just stuff like that happens that it's
the stuff that gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, it does.
Thanks again.
Yeah.
Fred, I have a question regarding vegetative growth. I have a few mini cats. I don't have any problems with yours, but some of the older mini cats, I'm noticing some black marks on the leaves, and they're not fungus. Can you say something about that, or what it's from?
Yeah, it's hard to say without seeing what it looks like. Or how big are the pots that the plants are in? Are they still in small pots? Or are you getting these older ones into bigger and bigger pots?
They're maybe in 3-inch pots. Some of them are more mature plants. I'm kind of letting them grow.
Yeah.
And they kind of persist. I didn't know if it was from the cross. I thought maybe it might be from a Cattleyas, but I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you think the root system is healthy on them?
Not all of them.
Yeah. So if you have a root system that's not working well, that might be an explanation. Sometimes with mini cats, they're small growing. And so it's interesting. If you had a big standard Cattleya and it had grown 20 pseudo bulbs, you'd probably think about dividing it, right? If you have a mini cat growing in a little 3-inch pot and it has 20 pseudo bulbs, you need to divide it too, just like that large plant. And so mini cats should stay in small pots. So I'm glad to hear you have them in 3-inch pots. So keep them in the small pots. They do better when they're small potted. They don't want to be in a big 6-inch pot, some little mini cat. They won't do well because the media will stay too wet too long and they won't thrive. And so if you want, you can email me, send me some pictures of your plant, and I'll see if I can diagnose it.
Thank you. That's an awesome consideration about the pot size. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see that a lot where people take these little mini cats and they put them in these big pots, and you no wonder they're not doing good because they're over potted. You need to keep a mini cat in a mini pot.
Fred, are you doing your own laboratory work?
Not anymore. With the growth of the nursery and everything, the lab takes as a big time commitment. It takes you one day to cook everything, and then it takes you at least one day under the hood all day. So that's 2 days. That means I only have 5 days left in the week. And so I started outsourcing my lab work about 8 or 9 years ago. And so I send some to Thailand. Some goes to Australia, believe it or not. I send dry seed to Australia. And then locally there's a gal. So I have 3 labs that I use. And that way, if there's a political problem in Thailand, I have 2 other labs, right? And so you have a backup plan. So you don't bet the farm, so to speak, all on one lab. Yeah. One of the things that I do is that, for example, I usually get 500 plants from the lab back, but I only plan on growing 300. And so as I get the flasks, I'll deflask them, and then I'll pick the best looking plants from the flask, the plants that have 3 roots or more on them. And those are the plants that get potted up into the cell trays. And so I've high graded the best quality plants coming out of the flask, the ones with the strongest growth potential. And then after I grow those plants in the cell trays for a year, I usually have 300 of those. Then I pick about 200 of the best of those and pot those up and high grade again to the strongest growing plants, because I want plants to grow fast and bloom quick so I can see them bloom. And it's good. It's good for me, but it's also good for my customers because I'm selecting the best and strongest plants out of the process, and the slow growers and the plants that aren't good or take longer to bloom have been left behind. So it works for everybody, actually. And so if you're buying flasks, I would recommend that. You don't want to try to, I know it's an investment, but you don't need to grow every plant. Just grow the good ones. Plan on growing 75% of the plants, unless it's just a remarkable flask and everything is good. Usually they're not. Yeah.
Fred, we have a question coming in on chat from Shu. She writes, I want to know about breeding for fragrance. And if so, is it on the seed or the pod parent? And how far back in ancestors do you look at?
Yeah. So fragrance is an interesting thing. And so it's important to understand the species in the background. A lot of mini and smaller growing Cattleyas that are red, orange, and yellow are pollinated by hummingbirds. The species are. And if you're hummingbird pollinated, you do not evolve a fragrance or a scent because it's not needed. What hummingbirds are looking for is the color of the flower. And so hummingbird pollinated species don't have a fragrance. So usually night pollinated orchid flowers are fragrant, and those happen to be more white or pink or light lavender colored kind of flowers, and that are pollinated by moths, which are attracted to the scent. And so if you're breeding for fragrance, you want to make sure you understand which species you have in the background for fragrance. And so a lot of bifoliate Cattleyas are fragrant. They have a spicy kind of fragrance. And the standard Cattleyas usually are more fragrant than what mini cats would be. And so what I would do is, if fragrance was a key, and we know there are certain fragrant orchids like Brassavola digbyana, very fragrant at night, Brassavola nodosas, and all these are pollinated by moths. Is to just read up on that, figure out which ones are fragrance, and start combining them together. You can also, if you go to an orchid show, you can stick your nose in a lot of orchids and then find the fragrant ones and see if you can talk the owner out of it to use in your breeding program.
Fred, how do you know which genus are compatible when you hybridize?
With which what?
When you use different genus.
Oh, well, yeah. So they're all pretty. So the Cattley alliance is all pretty fertile among itself. So you can cross Laelias, Cattleyas, Sophronitis, Schomburgkias, Guaranthes. A lot of those will all combine well. And so in the Catasetum group, any of the Catasetum, Cycnochias, Marmotes, Cloecias, Galleandras all work pretty good together. The Vanda group in the same way. So sometimes when you get plants that are really dissimilar and aren't closely related, sometimes you get infertility that occurs in the next generation. And so you have to work through that as well in breeding. Usually it's pretty straightforward, really. But you can't cross a Cattleya with the Vanda, for example. They're just too dissimilar. Yeah.
So within that family is do you use any kind of resource to help you figure out which ones are most compatible, or is it just trial and error? Or
yeah, it's some of it's trial and error, but I've been doing it a long time. So I did the trial and error part a long time ago. And so now it's more, it seems intuitive. You just know what to do when you make the crosses, thanks to the earlier trial and error.
Thank you.
But there should be nothing stopping you from making an orchid hybrid if you want to. It's not hard to do. You've got labs over there in Hawaii. You should make some crosses and send the pods out and raise plants. When you make a hybrid yourself and you grow those plants up and flower those, it is very rewarding to see your offspring bloom. At least I find it very rewarding. That's what gets me up every day. Get out in the greenhouse and walk around to see what's blooming. Just you can't wait to see what's next out there.
Hey Fred, hi, this is Brandon again.
Yeah.
Do you know your splash and spotted Cattleyas? Do you have any photos that you can send with the list, or?
For the flask, you mean?
Oh no, just like the plants alone, the flower alone, like.
So a lot of a lot of the pictures that I had, like in this talk, those plants flowered last year. Yeah. And so they're all sold out though now. They're all gone. Yeah.
Okay.
All gone. Yeah. I posted some pictures on Facebook when they first started blooming, and everybody, they just
just took it all. Okay.
Yeah, that cross didn't last long. Yeah.
Okay. Well, do you are you gonna have any more that's available for the new ones?
Yeah, it won't be next year because it takes a while. So as soon as I discovered what a great combination that was, I started making more hybrids just like it and making crosses with those plants for the next generation. So that was 2 years ago. And so in 2 more years, in 2025, we'll have a whole bunch of hybrids like that.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. But
Yeah.
the flash one is a new one, right?
Yeah. So next year
Yeah.
on the Cattleya flask, there will be some of that kind of breeding available next year, like in January, February.
Oh, okay. Gotta wait till then.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Oh, thanks a lot.
Okay.
So Fred, when your list comes out, I assume you get inundated with emails and
Oh.
orders. How do you prioritize all these orders?
Well, when the orders come in, we try to do them in the chronological order that they arrive. And so we put a little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 300, 350, 400, you get buried with orders. And then we try to pull the plants in order the best we can. Sometimes it doesn't happen as designed. And but yeah, it's a lot of work when that list comes out. I don't know how to do it any differently. You can't cut off the list and tell everyone, nope, sorry, you didn't order fast enough. You have to wait till next week to order. And so it's really tough, actually. It's really hard because there'll be, it'll take 5 days to pull all the plants, take 4 days to pack them all up in the boxes. It's just, man, oh man. But we go through that multiple times. When the Cattleyas list hits, it'll be the same way. It'll be a jillion orders. So life in the orchid business.
Thank you. Interesting.
Fred, this is Hongwei Li again. So you are in the field long enough. So my question is about, in orchid field, what's the general rule for intellectual property? You made a lot of hybrid.
Yeah, there's kind of the unspoken rule where, a guy's breeding, is a guy's breeding. There are some people out there who feel that those rules don't apply to them, and so they might take possession of your plant and then decide to clone it and distribute it worldwide without your permission or compensating you for your hard work. And so that happened with After Dark, right? So After Dark, Black Pearl, and SVO, that's been cloned. I don't know, there's probably been a lot. I never got 1 cent of that from those people who decided to clone those plants in other countries. And so the only solstice you have is that you were first. And so you got to get in fast, you got to sell quick, make your money, and then move on and stay ahead of those guys. And as a breeder, no one can touch me in terms of my genetics because I'm 5 years ahead of anybody who wants to get involved with me. And so, that's happened with the yellow Cattleyas, the yellow spotted with the red. So some guy cloned one of those and they're selling it all over the place. And so, what are you going to do? You can't be the plant police, right? And so if you patented it, right? You've heard about people patenting it. So then if you patent it, then how do you police it? And then if you find out that some nefarious person has stolen your patent, then what are you going to do about it? You're going to go to the international courts and sue the guy and find him, and so it doesn't work. And I don't want to do that. I am not the plant police. So the only solstice I have is I know I'm ahead of the next guy. So I get in, produce the plants, get the satisfaction out of it, get my customers, satisfied, and then move on with something else. And isn't that kind of how the hobby is, right? Don't you want to keep your collection fresh and updated and add more plants and have new things coming along. You know, there's nothing worse than having an old stale orchid collection. You've seen those plants bloom over and over and over again. And, you know, some of them might have some meaning for you, but, you know, getting new plants and getting rid of the old plants that don't inspire and curating your collection. I think that's where the fun is, and get stuff new and different and see those first bloom plants and pick out the best one and get rid of the ones that aren't so good and do that with your collection. And so that's what you should do. When you buy clones, it's okay. But, you know, when you buy a clone, you got to know that hundreds of thousands of other people have your plant. Wouldn't you rather have that unique, one-of-a-kind plant that's truly your own and no one else owns that plant, right? Do you want to own the Mona Lisa or a copy of the Mona Lisa? Okay, I'll take the Mona Lisa any day, right? And so buying seedlings is a good way to go, you know. And then you get enough of them and you get good ones and you get them from a good breeder who's got good plants. It's a great way to build the collection and have something, you know, uniquely yours.
Thank you.
Fred, what is your policy on naming your plants? Do you?
Well, yeah, so usually the policy is if you bloom it first, you can ask me if you can name it and I'll say yes.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. I you know, I have a lot of hybrids and coming up with names can be difficult. And so sometimes there's certain things I do want to name, certain crosses, because I want to make sure it doesn't get some, you know, name on there. You're like, what is that? What's that? And so, but I name a lot. I've been naming a lot of stuff lately for people, you know, for the owners of the plants, for their grandmother and for their, you know, whatever. And that's okay. That's good. It's good stuff, man. It's cool to have an orchid named after you. And you should. If you don't have one, you should have one. Yeah. And usually I go ahead and name it on my own dime. You know, it costs, I don't know, $18 or something, but it's my cross. So I'll go ahead and name it for you. If you have one of my seedlings and you bloom it and you like it, let me know. Well, you know, we can name it after you. It's easy enough to do.
Great.
It'd be my honor to name an orchid after you or anyone in the club, actually.
Thank you.
All right, well, no more questions?
So thank you very much, Fred. It was an amazing presentation. The pictures were wonderful and the insights you have were just fantastic. One of the experienced orchid judges once told me, one of the very best things about being an orchid judge from many years ago was seeing the exciting new flowers that were the products of various people doing their own crosses and then bringing it out to the show for the first time. It was like Christmas time at every show.
Yeah.
And so many of the things that you said about these crosses and being surprised go back to that as well. So for all of us, we thank you for doing this presentation today.
All right, well, thank you. And have a great evening.
All right, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.